Every year, Tim Cook gets on stage and proudly says,
"It is the most advanced iPhone we've ever created."
And each year, there is at least one reason to call the new iPhone the worst iPhone. So here I have the worst iPhones Apple ever made. And oh boy, they're bad. Oh wait, this one shouldn't be here. The iPhone 13 mini, everybody. It all started with the 12 mini, and everything I say about it is true for the 13 mini, okay? I remember the release of the 12 mini like it was yesterday. One steel case opens, and inside it is another case, and then there is another case there, and then in the third case, there it is, the iPhone 12 mini. All the features of a big brother iPhone 12, same great OLED display, same internal, same camera. The crowds went wild. Everyone was so excited. I remember talking to one of my friends who wanted to buy the 12 mini, and he was like, "Yay, finally, a small phone. I hate these big screens." Now it's like the iPhone 5 is back. I'm totally buying it. For 3 months, he was drilling my brain with his indecisiveness. And you know which iPhone he bought? The 12, the regular one, with the big screen he seemingly hated. And he was not the only one. Apparently, only 5% of people bought the 12 mini. And if you think that the price was an issue, it was actually something much simpler. Was just a weak phone. Not on paper, but in the real world. Even though it had a high-quality display, great cameras, new design, and the latest chip, it was plagued by the one thing that was supposed to make it a hit: its small size. The display was too small to consume content comfortably, too small to type on. It did fit in any pocket, but what's the point if you cannot use it comfortably? But the worst part about it was the battery life. The battery was just too small to last a full day. The idea was for you to carry a smaller phone that is just like the big one, but to use it comfortably, you would have to buy a power bank, like the MagSafe battery pack that Apple released at the same event. And it was $99, which is exactly the difference it would cost you to go for the bigger iPhone. You see how the logic just doesn't work? And even though Apple made a noticeable improvement with the 13 mini, the damage has already been done. In people's minds, the mini was already the iPhone with no battery life, and no one cared that the 13 mini had almost identical battery life to the regular iPhone 12, which had a much bigger battery. No one cared about that. I can say that it's not a terrible phone. I can see myself using it. Not particularly comfortably, but I could technically use it without major issues. But still, it's too small, and the battery is just too weak. And then there's the price, the final nail in the coffin. The whole story of mini iPhones makes me sad. I'm not a huge fan of small phones. I use the 15 Pro Max for Christ's sake, but something about using a smaller phone that fits in your pocket and doesn't take any space just sounds exciting. If Apple made the XS Mini, for example, probably the mini lineup of iPhones would still be alive and well. That's 2 out of 10 failure. And just a few words about the iPhone 12. And you may not agree with me on this, but I consider it to be a small fail. But not as an iPhone in general, but as a cheaper iPhone. Before the 12, we had the XR and the 11, both cheap and severely different from more expensive XS and 11 Pro. The 12, however, derives from that quite a bit. It's not as cheap as the 11, but it did all the same things the same way. The only real difference was the new design and an OLED display. Oh wait, it also had a weaker battery. The 11 was the king of battery life, while the 12 was and still is just okay. But the display is great, the cameras are nice, and overall it feels really solid. So what's the catch? The catch is that was Apple's mistake to make it that similar to the 12 Pro. The ProMotion came to iPhones only with the 13 Pro next year, so 12 and 12 Pro had exactly the same displays. They looked almost the same way, had the same size, same camera module, same chip. It was the 12 Pro, but without LiDAR and one camera. For us buyers, was a dream come true. The best iPhone for the least money. But for Apple, after the 12, they started differentiating Pro and non-Pro iPhones much more aggressively. With 12 and 13 mini, Apple at least tried to be creative, but with the iPhone 8, they didn't even do that. Now picture this. The year is 2017. Apple shows the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus that are a minor upgrade over the iPhone 7 from last year. The crowd isn't all that excited. The design is roughly identical, with the only difference being the glass back and the wireless charger hiding under it. Same display, same home button, same camera camera system, there's nothing to be excited about. Minor upgrade that doesn't even deserve its own number. But then Apple does something it hasn't done in a while, innovates. And the world sees the phone that will change it all. The iPhone 10. New design, huge display without the home button, Face ID. This was huge. And the iPhone 8, it just got forgotten right here and there. Why would Apple even release the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus? What was the point? The company knew that this was the last year they were gonna sell iPhones with a home button as their main product, but they did it anyway. And that's how we ended up with this monstrosity. Look, I don't have much hate for the iPhone 8 because it doesn't evoke any emotions in me. I look at it and feel nothing, zero, nada. It's just like the iPhone 7 but slightly better. Definitely not better enough to justify upgrading from the iPhone 7. Gosh, it's not even that much better than the iPhone 6s. I just feel like it was all by the time it was released. By 2017, everyone was getting tired of the home button, people wanted to see something new, and the iPhone 10 gave them that novelty. The iPhone 8 was like this one friend that you don't really want to hang out with, but have to drag it to all of your parties just because he's your friend. Now, I don't really want to play the devil's advocate for the iPhone 8, but there might be a logical explanation to it all. Hear me out now. The iPhone 10 was a gamble for the company. Apple didn't know whether people would like the new design and the new way of interacting with the phone. They needed something to fall back on, something that will continue the lineup that people are used to. Apple needed something risk-free. That's how the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus were created. Sure, they weren't that much different than the iPhone 7, but they were different enough to sell. The company later used this slightly modernized chassis for the iPhone SE, 2 generations of it by the way, but all this reasoning doesn't change the fact that the iPhone 8 is a bad phone, and regardless of why it is the way it is, I'm gonna rate it 4 out of 10 fail. I think by now there is a pattern emerging here, a pattern of what we call a bad iPhone. A bad iPhone seems to be any iPhone that doesn't satisfy our expectations. All these iPhones weren't bad at the moment of their release. They were just a bad choice for us, customers. Does Apple make great products every time? No, of course not. That's just our expectations playing a trick on us. On me. You're probably expecting me to talk about the iPhone SE now. You want me to go on a rant about how terrible it is in 2024, how outdated it is, and believe me, I do have a few nice things to say about it, because nothing infuriates me more than selling a phone from 2014 for over $400. But at least the SE has its audience, a select group of people who want to use the home button in 2024 and look at a small, dim display. Oh, and have no battery life to go along with all that. There is a customer for that kind of phone. What I don't understand is people buying the iPhone 14. If you thought the iPhone 8 had no changes when compared to the iPhone 7, you better check your readings, because the iPhone 14 literally changed nothing. All it got was a slightly faster processor from the 13 Pro, which was mildly more powerful than the chip in iPhone 13. There was also crash detection, which hopefully you will never see in action, and it also learned how to shoot super stable action mode videos. That's all. The body stayed the same, the display saw no changes, the connectivity remained identical. This was literally the iPhone 13 but more expensive. Me and every member of my team disliked the iPhone 14 so much that we decided to sell it right after we made a video about it, because it doesn't deserve more than one video. Like, who would buy the phone that is 99% identical to the phone that costs less? Even now, Apple is still selling the iPhone 13 alongside the 14, and I would still recommend you getting the iPhone 13 if you are on a budget. There's literally no reason to buy the iPhone 14. By now, Apple made almost 40 iPhones. Every iPhone has brought something to the table. The iPhone 3GS got more powerful than the 3G, which was a noticeable improvement. The iPhone 4S got Siri and dual-core processor, which was a huge deal in 2011. The iPhone 5S has brought in the first ever 64-bit processor and Touch ID. The iPhone 6s, you got the gist. So even if I stretch the facts, the iPhone 14 should be called the iPhone 13s. So, iPhone 14, a 5 out of 10 failure. 15 plus. This iPhone is just mildly infuriating, and I don't really hate it that much. But how did the latest iPhone that's still on the shelves end up here? Well, the reason is simple. No one wants it. The 15 Plus came out just last year, so it's very much a modern iPhone by all means, has almost all the latest features, supports the latest iOS, and does all the iPhone things you wanted to do. On paper, it's a great phone, albeit a bit underwhelming for its price. It's got a big display, a great set of cameras, nice battery life. What's there not to like? It costs like a kidney. No, seriously, the price that Apple has chosen for this phone is ridiculously unfitting. $899. That's $100 more than the regular iPhone 15 and only $100 less than the base 15 Pro. The benefits it gives over the regular 15 are almost non-existent, a bigger screen and better battery life, but when placed against the 15 Pro, it loses at all parts except screen size and battery life. The 15 Pro has a much better display, better cameras, better internals, and it actually supports Apple Intelligence. For most people, the 15 Plus is an unnecessary phone that isn't worth the money. And no matter how many ads Apple makes, how it tries to push it as the best big iPhone for the budget, it's not gonna happen. Look, I'm not here to hate on Apple. We all make bad decisions, and the company will probably admit it this year and not release the 16 Plus. When the 14 Plus first came out, it was already an underwhelming upgrade that accounted for only 10% of iPhone sales. 15 Plus, even with it being a much better phone, managed to perform even worse, accounting for only 9%. It's not a bad phone, it's just an unnecessary phone. They need to pull a plug on this. Tim Cook is not some evil genius. He just wants to make money for his company. He saw that people are buying Max iPhones more, so he assumed that people would buy a cheaper but bigger iPhone too. And this iPhone would cost Apple even less to manufacture because it doesn't have the latest tech, so I would rate the 15 Plus a 6 out of 10 fail. Yet all the iPhones I've talked about were at least somewhat decent. They had good materials, good design, and were generally well thought through devices. Yes, even the iPhone 14, because believe me, the iPhone 14 will look like the best iPhone update ever once you remember that way back in 2013, Apple released the iPhone 5S. Powerful, fast, with Touch ID, the real successor to wildly popular iPhone 5. So what's the problem? This is the problem. The iPhone 5C. And I don't really know where to start here. There's just so much about it that went wrong. The first thing we need to understand is that the times were different back then. There were no Pro iPhones and regular iPhones. The whole Apple sales model worked in a different way. There was one flagship iPhone and the previous year's models that were sold alongside it for cheaper. When the 4S was launched, the iPhone 4 was sold alongside it. When the iPhone 5 launched, the same happened to the iPhone 4S. So with the 5S, people were expecting to just get the iPhone 5 for less. But this wasn't in Apple's plans. The company decided to discontinue the iPhone 5 entirely and replace it with an iPhone 5C. C here was supposed to stand for color, because there were many color options with this phone. S in 5S was for security. Oh, those were fun times when we had to guess what each letter stands for. Sometimes I wish for those times to come back, but I digress. With the launch of the iPhone 5S, everyone got the breakthrough iPhone. They were expecting new colors, new processor, new home button with Touch ID. There was a lot to the iPhone 5S that made it so good and popular. The iPhone 5C, on the other hand, had nothing. Literally, it had nothing to show for it. It was just the iPhone 5 repackaged in a different housing for exactly the same price that the iPhone 5 would have cost if it stayed in the lineup. Instead of associating with color, the iPhone 5C for people became the cheap iPhone. People weren't really buying it. Internally, it was still the iPhone 5, but this change to its design was its main undoing. Another reason why the 5C was so bad in terms of sales was the 5S was just too good. The iPhone 5S had a great design and used premium materials. It had all the latest features, was many times faster in all tasks, and cost only a bit more than the 5C. The 5S was so good that Apple used its body for the first generation iPhone SE. That's how good it was. And the iPhone 5C, it just disappeared into obscurity. I haven't even mentioned the storage problems because it had terrible storage options. 2013 was the time when iPhones were still being shipped with 16 gigs of memory, but that wasn't nearly enough even back then. Even though the 5C was and still is the worst iPhone in Apple's history, I still have warm memories of it. And many people do too. But most importantly, it changed Apple. It was the iPhone that changed the company forever and showed how Apple shouldn't approach making iPhones. You know, I find it somewhat weird to call the 5C the worst iPhone ever, but it definitely deserves the 10 out of 10 failure. Apple made a ton of iPhones over the years. Some were more successful, others less, but each of them was an iPhone. Even the worst ones and the least imaginative ones had that Apple magic within them, which drew many people in. And right now, the power of the brand is so huge that people will buy any iPhone, even 5C. But who knows, maybe Apple's biggest failure is already here. I've gotten the impression that Vision Pro is not doing so well. What do you think? Leave your opinions in the comments, and in case you're on the market for the new iPhone, be sure to check out our video about the biggest iPhone buying mistakes you can make. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.